Hello everybody, my name is Robius and welcome to a new episode of Assassin's Creed The Real History. In this series, I compare events in a selected character's life within one of the Assassin's Creed games to the actual history the individual lived through. As always, beware of major story spoilers. For today's episode, we'll be taking a look at the history of the Countess of Forli, Caterina Sforza. As is customary, I'll begin this episode by sharing with you her pre-game history, which will inform us on her background prior to AC2, then her in-game history, which we see depicted in the game, and lastly we will analyze the differences between what happens in the game to the real historical events of her life. Starting with her pre-game history, Caterina Sforza was born in Milan in 1463 and was the illegitimate daughter of Galeazzo Maria Sforza and his mistress Lucrezia Landriani. She was initially raised by her mother's relatives. However, in 1466, when her grandfather Francesco passed away, her father became the Duke of Milan and therefore brought Caterina and her three other siblings that her parents had sired to live with him in his court. In 1468, Galeazzo married Bona of Savoy, and although she wasn't the mother of any of his children, she adopted all four of them. As children, Caterina and her siblings received what was considered a humanistic education, learning Latin, literature, the arts, governing, and even some military tactics. In 1473, at the age of 10, Caterina was betrothed to Girolamo Riario, nephew of Pope Sixtus IV, although certain rumors claim that he was the Pope's illegitimate child. The two were married on January 17th, 1473, but they only consummated their marriage 4 years later in 1477 when Caterina had reached the legal age of the period, which was 14 years old. Pope Sixtus IV granted to her husband the city of Imola as his kingdom, although they also lived in Rome for a period when Girolamo served as uncle. In March of 1478, Caterina gave birth to her first child, Bianca. In the following 9 years, she would give birth to 5 more children. While in Rome, despite her husband's objections, Caterina soon became very well versed in the ways of politics. In 1480, since the Pope wanted to increase his power in Romagna, he gave to Girolamo the city of Forli, so as to establish a foothold. However, in 1484, when Pope Sixtus IV passed away, chaos broke out and there was looting and fighting all over Rome concerning his replacement. Girolamo took control of part of the city, while Caterina, who was 7 months pregnant at the time, captured the Castel Sant'Angelo with her men, since neither wished to lose their fiefdoms in reason of a potentially unfavorable pope. Eventually, the College of Cardinals made a deal with Girolamo, confirming his control over Imola and Forli, paying him 8,000 ducats for the damage to his property, and the position as captain general of the church. He agreed, but Caterina resisted, and only after her husband's forces were about to battle her own did she surrender the fortress and leave Rome with her family. While in Forli, a new pope, Innocent VIII, was elected. However, he did not pay Girolamo, nor did he allow him to have any real control over the papal armies as had been originally agreed. Trying to win over the people of Forli, Girolamo had abolished taxes and continued this system until 1485 when the city's government was completely bankrupt. He finally enforced an expensive levy tax, for which the population grew to hate him. Plots to remove Girolamo from his position of power began to form across Forli. It was around this time where we first met Caterina in Assassin's Creed 2 while Ezio was passing through Forli on his way to Venice. Historically, following over 6 assassination attempts, Girolamo was killed on April 14th, 1488 during a conspiracy orchestrated by the Orsi family. Caterina, her children, and the city, except for its fortress, were captured. While discussing with her captors, Caterina convinced them to let her go speak to the fortress guards to convince them to surrender, and as collateral she left her children with them. However, once inside the fortress, she began swearing at the invaders. One legend states that when they threatened to kill her children, she lifted her dress and exposed her genitals, stating, "Ho con me lo stampo per fare di altri," which means I have the mold with which to make more.
Or shall I slice your baby's necks ear to ear?
Bastardi! You think you can threaten me? I'll give you nothing! You want my children? Take them! I have the instrument to make more!
Historically, it is said that her ally Ludovico il Moro soon arrived and helped her defeat their enemies, regain control of the city, and have revenge on these attackers. This entire sequence was well represented in the AC2 DLC, except that it was with Ezio and Machiavelli's help that she took back her city, and the game claimed that she had ordered her husband's killing and was betrayed by the Orsi. When the fighting ended, her eldest son, Ottaviano, was set to rule Forli. However, since he was too young, Caterina acted as his regent. In this position, she arrested and imprisoned every person who could be connected to her husband's murder, destroyed their homes, and took possession of their valuables and distributed them to the poor. She wasted no time in establishing an efficient and powerful government. Her spending was strict. She lowered taxes to a reasonable level, made great negotiations with other city-states of Italy, and was personally involved in the training of her militia, keeping her city and towns peaceful. In 1488, she secretly married Giacomo Feo, since she didn't want to lose custody of her children, and in 1489 they had a son together. Following worries that Ottaviano's position may be usurped, an assassination attempt was made on her life. However, it was foiled. She subsequently had all people involved imprisoned and then executed. Her new husband's power and cruelty grew, and soon, most people, including Caterina's own children, hated him. After an incident in which Giacomo slapped Ottaviano, who was the rightful ruler of Forli, a conspiracy was organized, including some of Caterina's own children. When they returned from a hunting trip, Giacomo was mortally wounded and later died. Caterina then hunted down all the people involved that she could locate and had them and most of their families brutally tortured and executed. Unfortunately, this destroyed her reputation with her people. In 1479, after a secret courtship, Caterina married Giovanni Popolano, who had renounced his Medici last name, but this time with the approval of both her children and her uncle Ludovico Sforza. Due to this new alliance between Florence and Forli, when a conflict with Venice began, since Forli was between the two cities, Caterina prepared her forces. Giovanni and her eldest son Ottaviano led their knights to aid Florence. However, Giovanni later became seriously ill, and on September 14, 1498, he died. Now alone, Caterina personally trained her militia and received some troops from Milan and Mantua to aid her. When the Venetians struck, it was a brutal battle, followed by many minor skirmishes, but Forli did not falter. Eventually, the Venetians took a longer, alternative route to reach Florence, simply to avoid Forli. For her incredible defense of the city, Caterina gained the nickname Il Tigre. Hearing that the new French king, Louis XII, had allied with the Borgia Pope in order to capture Italian towns, including Caterina's, the Duchess sent her children away to Florence and fortified her cities. On November 24th, Cesare Borgia with his French troops arrived in Imola. Certain citizens let him enter the city, although the fortress within withstood him for several days until he managed to capture it as well. Asking her people in Forli if they wanted to surrender or fight, when most of them hesitated, Caterina released them from their fealty to the city and sealed herself and some soldiers inside the fortress. On December 19th, Cesare took the city and offered her peace multiple times if she just surrendered, which she refused to do. A price of 10,000 ducats was offered for her capture, dead or alive. At one point, however, she made it seem as if they could negotiate, but instead she nearly succeeded in capturing Cesare. Unfortunately, he managed to evade this attempt. After many days of back and forth artillery fire between the fortress and the French army, in which time Caterina killed many enemies, the defenses of the fortress were destroyed and she was eventually captured on January 12, 1500, after a bloody battle where Cesare's men stormed the fortress. This capture was differently represented in Assassin's Creed Brotherhood, since the game showed her being taken during the Battle of Monteriggioni. She tried to surrender to the French, but was soon transferred to Cesare's custody, who later brought her back to Rome, where she was held in the Belvedere Palace. She tried to escape in March, but was captured and later imprisoned in the Castel Sant'Angelo. The Pope justified this imprisonment, claiming that in some of her letters she had tried to poison him, although there are no records either confirming or denying this. On June 30th, 1501, she was freed by the French when they returned through Rome after taking Naples. Having lost her fiefdoms to Cesare, Caterina traveled to Florence to meet her children. She lived in the former home of her third husband and fought a legal battle for the custody of her youngest son, which she won in 1504. After Pope Alexander VI died, she asked the new Pope, Julius II, for her fiefdoms back, to which he agreed. However, the population opposed, and instead Imola and Forli were given to Antonio Maria Ordefalli. In April of 1509, Caterina became ill of pneumonia, and on May 28th of the same year, at the age of 46, she died. This final sequence was also differently showcased in ACB, as Ezio was the one to free her from the Castel Sant'Angelo, which eventually led her to move to Florence. In summary, there were a few differences between Caterina's actual life and her representation in Assassin's Creed 2 and Brotherhood. Firstly, the game depicted Caterina as the one who had her first husband killed in reason that he was a Templar. However, this was not the case. Secondly, and this ties into the first reason, it was with the help of her uncle that she recaptured Forli, and not with the help of Ezio and Machiavelli. Thirdly, ACB showed Caterina being captured by Cesare during the fictional siege of Monteriggioni, when in reality she was captured while defending Forli. Fourthly, her entire romantic/political relationship with Ezio was evidently fictional. Fifthly, the game showed her imprisoned in the Castel Sant'Angelo and beaten by Lucrezia before being rescued by Ezio, when in reality she was imprisoned until the French returned to Rome and freed her. And with that final fact, we have finished another episode of Assassin's Creed The Real History. I hope you all enjoyed the video, and if you did, I highly recommend you try out one of the Assassin's Creed games. Thank you all for watching. Please leave any suggestions for future characters from any of the Assassin's Creed games that you'd like me to cover in the comment section below. Please rate, comment, and subscribe for future episodes, and I'll see you all in the next video.